Hello, welcome. It's Friday, it's 5 o'clock. Well, it's not 5 o'clock, is it? It's nearly 5 o'clock. Does it count as nearly 5 o'clock when it's after five? And I haven't. So I'm late, and I seem to have an elephant in the room upstairs. Maybe I shouldn't be in here, maybe I should go somewhere else, but I was, hang on a minute. Christopher! You need to be quieter. If you jump on the floor like that, don't jump about on the floor. You're right above me. Oh my word. Honestly, it's like having an elephant for a son. So yes, late with an elephant upstairs, and actually most upsettingly of all, I haven't actually managed to order my fish and chips because I rang them up and nobody answered. And now if they ring me back, my phone won't ring because if I don't put it onto silent, then things interrupt this. So I have to turn it so that it doesn't accept anything incoming, because otherwise I've had streams of WhatsApp conversations pop up in the past before I realised about turning it off. Anyway, it's Friday. Hooray, it's Friday. And yeah, the end of another week of homeschooling. I wonder if some of you might be going back to school in June. Unfortunately, we're not at the beginning anyway, because we don't have children, or not all of our children are in the right year groups, and it makes no sense for some to go back and others not. So yeah, we're in for the long haul, however long the long haul is. Anyway, never mind. Just means I'll just carry on doing this at the same time of day, I suppose. Chapter 9. Oh yes, so Joe is back in Lucy's world, and he's just turned up there sort of out of the blue, and he's arrived in the forest, obviously on the spot where he was knocked off his horse before, because that's how it always works. He always arrives back on the spot that he left. And he has no horse this time, because of course he hasn't come from the riding stables this time. This time he has no horse with him, so he's on foot. Chapter 9. It felt like a longer walk than Joe was expecting. Of course, he never had a watch with him in Lucy's world, but he thought he'd come to the fork in the track after about 20 minutes yesterday. The horse had been plodding along, no faster than he was walking now. He started to worry. Had he somehow taken the wrong turning? But that wasn't possible. There was only one track leading back down the hill. He must be going the right way. It was quiet in the forest. Even his footsteps made very little sound on the dry mud of the track. He listened to the birds singing and tried to work out what time of day it might be. There was a freshness in the air that felt like early morning. In that case, perhaps he was hearing the dawn chorus. But what time was dawn? He looked around for other clues without quite knowing what he was looking for. The leaves on the beach were a solid green, not pale and folded up as they'd been before. That meant it must be summer. That meant it must be summer, he realised, in which case at least a month must have passed here, perhaps even 2 or 3. In the middle of summer it got light very early indeed, so it might easily be 6 o'clock. It'd be before 6 o'clock still. He felt pleased with this piece of detective work, until it occurred to him that none of this would make any difference to him finding Lucy. If this was like her other worlds, people's lives would be tied to sunrise and sunset much more closely than at home. Everybody would have been up and about as soon as it got light, regardless of how early it was. He turned to thinking about his horse, or rather his lack of horse. If he was supposed to be coming from Nunny, he would only be walking if he'd lost his horse on the way, or he'd been sent without one. Perhaps he could say it had been stolen on the way back before, and now he wasn't trusted to ride. That seemed plausible. After all, he had been attacked and the horse had disappeared. He stopped dead on the path. The horse had disappeared right in front of the servant boy. Worse still, the boy had seen him vanish as well. Joe gulped. He still didn't know what the moment itself looked like to someone else, whether he faded out or whether he was just suddenly not there. It made no odds, though. Gone was gone, and the only explanation was magic. He'd never thought about it in such bald terms before. In fact, he would have said he didn't believe in magic. But people here did, and they were afraid of it. In a world where you could be hanged for witchcraft, disappearing under somebody's nose might be an extremely dangerous thing to do. The palms of Joe's hands prickled with sweat. For a few moments he thought about staying right here in the woods and hiding. Maybe Lucy would find him somehow. He walked on a little, looking around for a hollow tree, or one that he might be able to climb fairly easily. And then suddenly, ahead of him, he caught a glimpse of the castle. The sight of it was like an electric current through him. The walls gleamed white, the windows sparkled, and the pennants danced against the blue sky. A few minutes ago, back in his own world, it had been in ruins. Now it was alive again. Joe knew he wanted more than anything to be there on the inside. The time he had in Lucy's world was precious. He mustn't waste it skulking around up here. Everything would work out somehow. He hurried down the last part of the track. On the edge of the woods, he paused, trying to decide how best to get through the gatehouse and find Lucy. Perhaps he should tell the gatekeeper, Peakes, he remembered, that he'd just left his horse at the stables and that he was carrying another message for Sir William Lucas. Or perhaps it would be better if the message were for Lucy's uncle, Sir Thomas. That way he might avoid too many questions about the message he'd failed to take back to Nunny. He felt uneasy about telling such an outright lie. But it was too bad. He didn't have a genuine reason to be here, so there was nothing close to the truth he could say. Keeping himself hidden, he made his way along the edge of the wood towards the stables so that he could approach the gatehouse from the right direction. Suddenly, he saw someone bending down on the grass beyond the trees. She was picking some leaves off a plant. He waited a couple of moments to be quite sure, and then hissed, "Lucy!" She looked round. "Over here." Her face broke into a smile as she spotted him. She hurried across the grass, her basket swinging on her arm. "Joe! Fancy seeing you. I was thinking about you not half an hour ago." "I know." He grinned. "That's why I'm here." She looked surprised. "I've thought of you before, though, and you didn't turn up then." "I tried to explain that to you already," he said. "I have to be thinking of you at the same time, and never mind. It really doesn't matter. The main thing is I'm back." "Do you have another message from the Lord St. John?" She glanced down at her basket and rearranged the leaves and flowers in it. "No." Joe patted his clothes in case there was something tucked away that he hadn't noticed. "I don't seem to have anything on me this time." "But you've come from Nunny." "No. You do remember, don't you? I'm not actually from there." "Where have you been then?" She was puzzled. "I thought you took my father's reply back to the Lord St. John." "I never got there. I was attacked by the servant boy who was sent to fetch me a spoon and board when I ate with you. You know the one I mean?" She looked blank. "He's about our age, maybe a year older. The same height as me, light brown, wavy hair. Looks a bit like Tobias." Joe wished he'd managed to point the boy out to her. "Anyway," he went on, "he rode after me." "Why?" "He wanted my St. Christopher." "But you'd given it to me already." "I know. I didn't tell him that, though, in case he guessed you had it." Joe saw worry flicker across Lucy's face. "What happened?" she asked. "He thought the St. Christopher was round my neck, so he launched himself at me to get it. I fell off the horse and got pulled back into my own world, and the horse came with me." Lucy now looked thoroughly confused. You do remember what I said about where I come from? Yes, I think so. She didn't sound at all certain. By the way, the St. Christopher worked, she said. Of course it did, otherwise I wouldn't be here. No, not that. Anne's well again. I showed it to her every day for a week, just in case she was going to die, but it made her better instead. That was nothing to do with the St. Christopher, Jo said. She must have just got better on her own. I looked up scarlet fever at home, and it said that people sometimes do, even without treatment. It was plain from Lucy's expression that she didn't believe him. The St. Christopher isn't magic, you know, he insisted. Except you say it calls you here from another world. What's that, if not magic? Jo didn't answer. She was right, but he was still sure that it didn't have any healing properties. Anyway, he said, changing the subject, I've got a problem now. This time I have no horse and no message, so how do I explain what I'm doing here? You don't have a horse, she repeated to herself, picking up a leaf from her basket and rubbing it thoughtfully. What about its livery? Did that get carried back into your world as well? No, just the horse. He was about to tell her what had happened, but stopped. There was no point. That's interesting. Really? Jo raised his eyebrows. She looked up sharply. Do you want me to help you or not? He bowed his head. Yes, please, he said meekly. Well, for now, I think we should say that you got attacked in the woods on your way here. We'll say they stole your horse with the message you were carrying in the saddlebag. That's quite a good idea, Jo said grudgingly. Thanks. He ignored her sarcastic tone. What will you do now? Well, I can't arrive at the same time as you, so I'll carry on with this for a bit. She indicated her basket. What exactly are you doing? Gathering herbs and flowers. I've done quite well, actually. Look, I found mallows and elderflower as well as foxgloves. It's Midsummer's Eve, so they have magical properties. And there's some yarrow, too, which will burn tonight to keep the evil spirits away. Jo opened his mouth to say something, and then closed it. There's some fern seed there as well. Over there, she said, but I'll have to come back for that. When you pick it on Midsummer's Eve, it has powers of invisibility, but you mustn't touch it when you collect it. You have to use a forked hazel twig to shake the seeds onto a pewter plate. Incredible, Jo exclaimed. Lucy looked at him through narrowed eyes, but decided that he was being sincere. Anyway, she continued, you'll need to rough yourself up a bit before you get to the gatehouse. You need to look as though you've been properly attacked. Jo nodded. I'll see you down there in a little while. She walked away with her basket over her arm, not looking backwards once. Jo made his way through the trees again. For someone to steal his horse, he would have had to come off it first. He lay down and rolled around on the ground as though the horse had thrown him. Then he picked up a large stick. A page wouldn't let his master's horse be taken unless he was beaten up. He looked at the curl of bark lifting along one edge. At the other end there was a sharp spike where another branch had snapped off. He brought the stick close to his face and flexed his wrist, trying to imagine hitting himself. It was no good, he couldn't do it. If he didn't let himself think about it, though, he might manage to graze his cheek. In a sudden movement, he swiped the stick down the side of his face. Instinctively, he flinched away, and the stick barely touched him. He sat down at the foot of the nearest oak tree and pressed his face to the trunk so that he couldn't duck out of the way. Bracing himself, he brought the stick up to his cheek, then quickly sawed it hard across his skin. It hurt. He dropped the stick and put his hand to his cheekbone. There were tiny speckles of blood. It might not be much, but it would have to do. He looked at the dirt on his hands, then rubbed his face with them. Without a mirror, it was impossible to know whether he looked beaten up or just grubby. He got to his feet, resisting the impulse to brush himself down. As an afterthought, he took his hat off and trailed it through the leaf litter, then put it back on slightly askew. As he walked down the track to the gatehouse, butterflies fluttered in his stomach. It was always scary, having to make his way in Lucy's world without her at his side. He remembered how nervous he'd been walking up to the front gates of the palace at Fishbourne, pretending to be someone he wasn't. It had worked, though, he reminded himself. As long as you were confident, people believed what you said. Peakes stepped out as Joe approached the gatehouse. He looked at Joe with concern. "Aren't you the Lord St. John's page?" he said. Joe gave a little bow. "Joseph Hopkins, sir." "What's happened to you?" Joe took a deep breath. "I was on my way here with a message for Sir Thomas when I was attacked." "Attacked?" "In the woods, not far from here, 2 vagrants." Joe hesitated for a moment. Was 2 enough? "They ambushed me," he went on. "They stole my horse. The letter I was carrying was in the saddlebag. I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do." Peakes clicked his tongue. "That's bad, very bad. We've been hearing reports of gangs of vagabonds roaming the countryside. Stoned out of town they are, and then they sleep rough in the woods and make trouble for us all." Joe nodded. "What should I do?" "Morley will decide. Go to the steward's office and tell him what's happened. He'll probably send out a search party to find the men that did it." "Near here, you said?" "Not very far away," Joe agreed. It didn't matter if Morley sent men out to look for his attackers, he thought. They wouldn't find anything. He set off along the track towards the castle entrance again, aware of Peake's gaze following him. He didn't want to hurry, because he wanted Lucy to catch him up, so he put on a slight limp as an excuse for dawdling. She still hadn't reached him by the time he got to the entrance, however. Morley was talking to a man in his office doorway, so Joe waited beneath the first portcullis. For a moment he was overwhelmed by an intense longing to have Dad here with him. Dad had been so delighted by the ruins of Wardour. What would he think to see it like this? It was a shame that it was impossible. Joe looked back towards the gatehouse to see if Lucy was coming. What he saw sent a jolt through him. Walking towards him along the track was the servant boy who had attacked him. Worse than that, he was deep in conversation with Tobias. Joe let out a gasp. What would the boy do when he saw him? What would he say? Had he told anyone what had happened last time they'd met? The boy looked up. Joe saw his footsteps falter, then stop altogether. Tobias turned to his companion. The boy's face had gone rigid. Joe swallowed. He waited for Tobias to ask what was the matter. But without another word, the boy spun round and ran back along the track towards the gatehouse. "Robert!" Tobias shouted after him. "Robert!" But the boy didn't stop. Joe saw him dodge past Lucy as she came out through the main gates and dash away out of sight. Tobias turned back towards the castle. He looked baffled. Joe realised that the older boy didn't know what had caused his companion to rush off like that. Then he caught Joe's eye. Joe looked away immediately, but it was too late. Tobias had recognised him, and the muscles around his mouth had hardened. Joe shivered. Lucy had been adamant that the Falconer's apprentice was kind and decent, but the expression on his face right now suggested she'd been wrong. Joe stared at his feet and prayed she would catch him up before Tobias reached him. So there we are. What's the connection between the boy and Tobias? Joe has noticed they look alike. Are they related? Or is it just coincidence? Or what's going on here? You will have to wait till Monday to find out, because it's the weekend. So that's it for this week. We're just over halfway through now. So I'll be back on Monday with chapter 10 at 5 o'clock on Monday. I hope you have a nice weekend. I'm going to go and see if I can order myself some fish and chips. It's the highlight of my week. That's how things are these days. It's very good, actually. The fish and chip shop that we have to go to at the moment. It's not our local one, but it's not far away. So and it's great. It does really, really good food. So yes, it is a bit of a highlight. Anyway, I hope you have a lovely weekend. I think the weather's going to be a little bit warmer, which will be very nice because my goodness me, it's been a bit cold. And I'll see you again on Monday. Bye.